When you think of forgotten killers, your mind may go initially to characters such as the twins or even the Skull Merchant, but these characters I would debate are actually far from being forgotten and actually some of the most present in the conversations around Dead by Daylight due to them being so problematic or controversial. I want to look at the killers today that really just seem to have been forgotten. Hey everyone, today let's take a look at Dead by Daylight's forgotten characters, and why they ended up like this. To start off, I do want to look at the most forgotten killer of the game, the Hag. The Hag is currently the least played killer in the entire game. Not only this, but she's also seemingly been quite forgotten by the developers too. She's a character that you may have even forgot existed at all if you largely play Survivor. When was the last time you faced a Hag? For me, this question is answered by simply not knowing. I honestly cannot recall the last time I faced a Hag, but what makes Hag so forgettable? Why has she dropped down and out of people's minds and the consciousness of the game? Well, for one, she's a very old character at this point, coming from the early days of DbD and its third chapter of Flesh and Mud. Despite this, it was never quite received in the same way as many of the chapters at that time were. Take its two succeeding chapters, Spark of Madness and A Lullaby for the Dark. These both containing two of the most iconic original characters of Dead by Daylight with Doctor and Huntress. Hag has never really been iconic, nor has she stood out much since her launch, despite her being on the main art of the game, for some reason, instead of Billy. She doesn't really suit this role. I think the reason she was picked is that she looks quite visually scary and is a bit more distinct than Billy is to the other characters in the main art. Hag sits on the awkward boundary where she was never made a part of the base game, but she's such an early character that not as many people will even remember her release and possibly existence. She's a character easily scrolled over in favor of the much flashier or simply newer additions to the game. Why pick Hag when there's so many other choices, all with more exciting powers that are updated a lot more frequently? Hag's power also isn't really that flashy or exciting in and of itself. It requires a lot of preparation and a careful and methodical setup of a web of traps to pull it off. It's something a lot of players just aren't really interested in, especially with her power not inflicting direct damage of any sorts, unlike Trapper, and also unlike Trapper, her not being free. Unless you really love this kind of playstyle, there's very little reason to engage with Hag, as she offers something quite specific, and a bit of an acquired taste, although it is unique. It also doesn't help though that this power has not really adapted at all with the times. Her updates, or lack of, are a big reason for people forgetting her. Hag has got to be one of the least changed killers in all of DbD history, especially considering how long she's been in the game. She released very weak, but was buffed up in patch 2.1.0. Then, she wasn't really notably changed for over 4 years, as in literally nothing coming to her core power. When she did finally get changes in 2022, it was to nerf her, and quite badly as well. Sure, flashlights could no longer burn her traps, but now a new mechanic was added allowing them to be completely wiped away. This sort of destroyed her. Where she was already struggling with each consecutive patch and update, this amplified it 10 times over. She got some small redemption in the following year with a series of buffs, but this was not nearly enough to spark interest after lack of attention for almost half a decade prior. This did happen in part 2 though, because Hag actually originally succeeded in many areas early into her lifespan, such as with her add-ons. Hers were always quite solid and consistent, so there was never much of a reason to change them, to be fair. Her core power, however, although it did start out like this, fell more and more in power over time, taking her from the A tier all the way down to C or even D, it could be argued. What doesn't help Hag is that her power is extremely outdated. She's another killer who is almost persistently left fighting for her own place in the game due to being a trap-based character. These characters being very reliant on things like maps and often perks or add-ons. Over the years, maps especially have become increasingly unforgiving for characters like Hag. Traps have become harder to hide, maps have grown larger and lighter, and the game in general has become a lot faster in pace, making setup difficult. To conclude, Hag just simply isn't that appealing, from her power itself to her visual design, to the fact that she doesn't offer something that most people want in a killer. She's She's a character with the downside of being an original addition, yet never quite fitting into the iconic lineup like the other killers have. She's always been there, but she's almost never someone's first choice. She rarely got updates, and when she did was made increasingly worse by them, but also the surrounding times of the game. Artist is a case of a character having a rather tepid release and reception. She was a character who launched in the Portrait of a Murder chapter in November 2021. This was a chapter that sat between a number of much more well-loved chapters and huge licenses. Therefore, this chapter as a whole, and its unique take on characters for Dead by Daylight, became quickly forgotten, in favour of just about everything else at the time. There was an air of disappointment surrounding this chapter, and its unique approach to characters, that I think simply wasn't appealing to a wider part of the DbD audience, especially as there had been rumours of this being a licensed chapter prior also. Artist just wasn't really expected, I think. On release, she was then almost instantly forgotten about. I remember even mentioning it around the time that she was clearly heading in this direction too. Artist's case is a little different, with her being a bit of a weird character and having a strange power. Her ability is to fire crows, and this requires quite a lot of practice and trial and error to learn, and it's definitely not very appealing to the wider player base. This I think is largely evident not only for her low pick rate, but also due to how the majority of people play her as a loop shutdown character, when her power is capable of so much more. She's quite frequently misunderstood, I think. This may be down to her overpowered PTB state, where she was especially effective like this due to her being able to damage people with use of a placed passive crow, which enabled her to gain control and shut down basically any and every loop in the game with complete ease. This leads her to often being written off a bit, not only because people view it as boring, but also because many, I don't think, really understand or get the point of her power, or why you would actively choose it over someone else's. The only reason she debatably does get picked up by many players is down to her teachable perk range, which has arguably become more iconic than she has, which is sort of sad. She, much like everyone else in this video, has power shortcomings too, which I do believe contribute to her forgotten nature and people's general refusal to engage with her. One of the big issues I personally have with it, and why I think people avoid playing her in a more interesting way, is that she can be quite easily countered by simple things like lockers. Lockers completely clear swarmed crows in an instant, disallowing you to use her power at a range. It's quite annoying honestly, and feels like it restricts you to using her power at a short range, and primarily as anti-loop, rather than going for long shots or trying to use it for long-range map control. It's this fatal flaw, I think. The other way it's restricted is due to maps with varying floors and multi-levels. These sort of mess her over quite a lot, and they're all the more prevalent nowadays. Take a map like the Vecna one, for example. The whole bottom floor of that map just doesn't really consider her, I think. The other shortcoming she's had could be argued as positive, but I think it is a bit of a negative. That's the fact she's never really been changed at all power-wise. That's right, her patches essentially equate to a rework that wasn't even directly related to her, but instead the flashlight changes made where all power-specific interactions were removed, including hers, which was to burn away crows with a flashlight. She's been the same since launch otherwise, which is sort of wild, I think, all the way back since 2021, and she's not changed. Much like Hag 2, this is nearing almost 4 years now since she got anything, any change at all. Granted, she doesn't necessarily need it, but one of the things that keeps a character alive in Dead by Daylight and in people's minds is when they get tweaked a bit, or tweaked every now and then. Trapper is still incredibly weak, but he does get quite a few changes, and he does seem to get buffed up sort of with the times a bit more. Take a look at Artist and it just feels like she's getting directly neglected. A lot of people just probably never hear about her at all in the patch notes because, well, I suppose because she's never really been in them. There's not been some new buff or some change to her that's compelled people to play her, unlike some other characters. She's always just sort of been there and always been the same. Looking beyond her shortcomings and lack of changes, people simply do not find her power appealing, I think. It's not especially flashy like Hag's. It also takes a lot of preparation and practice, and the payoff moments are often as simple as getting a single damage state from a long range. Another character I feel is really misunderstood, but also viewed as boring or dull, which is insane by the way, but I definitely get the vibe that that's the perception around her. Visually, Artist is quite a unique killer, but similar to Hag, she does fall to the wayside due to her base design being maybe too unrelated to her power or just a bit too dull. It's a weird combination of elements, even if it does work. She's an artist, she's got ink hands, an artsy dress, a long elongated neck, she caws like a crow. It is admittedly all quite strange. It doesn't fall into the typical killer Dead by Daylight usually features. This isn't to say it's a bad thing, as I do like her design, but it does make her less widely appealing is sort of my point. Artist was a character that featured as part of an overall forgotten chapter, but further one with a unique look and power as DbD goes. She presented opportunities for gameplay that simply isn't widely appealing to many people, and she has had little impact over time on the game and its meta, despite having the potential to, I think. Dredge may seem like an odd pick, but it's another character I think has really been forgotten. Contrary to the other killers here, Dredge actually had a very big launch and initial impact on the game. It was a character praised for its returning horror to Dead by Daylight. Dredge was seen almost as this classic return to horror and form for the game. Yet nearly 3 years on, and its pick rates are bordering 1%. It's been lacking changes of any sort of rework to its mechanics, and it still has glaring issues as a result of them never being addressed. It, much like the other two characters here, also barely has received any updates or changes to its power over the years. Dredge released in June 2022, in the game's 6th year anniversary, and to a very warm reception. Despite hesitation around it being an original anniversary, its power was also well received and initially liked, unlike the other two characters here, and the much more mild and varied receptions they got. Dredge seemed really cool, especially with the new Nightfall mechanic. But then it also had a number of other elements. Its remnant, teleportation ability to lockers, the ability to lock these lockers, and for all interactions to slowly build toward nightfall. It's very cool. I do think though Dredge has always had a weird combination of abilities and elements, this mismatch that does work for it as this patchwork monstrosity. However, it doesn't change the fact that gameplay wise it's a little unclear what it's really meant to be doing. Over time too, it became clear there was some issues with Dredge and its power to a greater extent. Namely, the main issue I think Dredge and its power has is lockers. Dredge relies on lockers in order to traverse maps, and this is honestly just quite detrimental. Locker placements and spawns after all existed long before Dredge did. The idea of a character moving between them as its main transportation system is cool, but it is by no means efficient, nor does it make all too much sense if the lockers aren't altered in placement to account for Dredge's existence. Imagine if they made a killer now, for example, that was capable of teleporting between chests, for example. It would kind of work with the chest placements, but it'd also just be really weird. It's inconsistent as a mechanic, and has never felt very fair with such a variety of maps and locker spawns on them. Shelter Woods is a huge offender of this, having almost no lockers anywhere, and even having some map corners where there aren't any at all. Dredge just was not accounted for or considered in the slightest when this map was made, which is sort of the whole issue with lockers being its main transportation mechanic. This expands more widely to maps that have released over time. They seem to, similar to trap characters and characters like Artist's requirement for multi-level play, just not really account for them. They just aren't that important. The other core flaw or downside to Dredge's power is the restriction put on it. It gets easily countered by the bolts, for example, on locker doors. People know nowadays that you can bolt one locker when there's two next to each other and you'll force Dredge to go into the locked one. It's quite irritating to play against this and to constantly be delayed by the locker break animation. Nightfall has its issues too, simply not being as effective as it was on launch. People are generally more comfortable with it now, and it doesn't have the same surprise factor or wildcard element it did initially. The biggest argument against Dredge being forgotten has got to be purely down to its design and visuals though. Dredge still receives a lot of cosmetics and really great ones at that. It always gets praise for these, and it's always in the conversation because of these. But so rarely on the other hand is it in the conversation for its gameplay, which I think is a bit more of the focus of this video. This is the primary way it stays sort of relevant, but gameplay wise I think it's terribly forgotten. Similar to the other picks here, it's not received many updates, but did receive one relatively recently. Granted, this was actually very good. Dredge is definitely a bit of a wild card pick for me, but I do think the way it's forgotten is still there. There we have it, my picks for the 3 most forgotten killers of Dead by Daylight. Thanks and goodbye.